Hello, and welcome to the first episode of While Rome Burns, part of the One Up Podcast Network. I am your host, Josh Fisher. In this podcast, I will be your guide through moments in history where inept leadership, foolish planning, or just plain bad luck brought about the fall of some great person or civilization. I am not a trained historian, but I am a storyteller, and stories are what I intend to bring to you here on this podcast. This means that some of the things I will share with you may be open to interpretation, or there may be disagreement between the scholars in the field, but I am here to bring you stories. And our first story begins in none other than ancient Rome. Sit back, relax, and let me tell you a story while Rome burns. Our first story begins on a hot July night in the city of Rome, in the year 64 CE. The market district around the Circus Maximus is all but abandoned. The windows are shuttered, the doors to the shops locked, and the candles and torches are snuffed out. A mother rocks her child to sleep as she gazes out from the top floor of the butcher shop she helps run with her husband. This is all she has in the world: this shop, the apartment above it, her husband, and her child. She hopes the young child will marry well, into a family of wealth and prestige, worthy of the honor and glory that is due all Romans. But all of those dreams will be violently taken from her and her husband this night. No one sees the mysterious men moving quietly through the market district. One by one, they fan out to the buildings, finding bundles of firewood, hay bales, dried grass, or anything else they can use as an accelerator. They drop their torches and flee the scene quickly, allowing nature and simple combustion to complete their dark deeds of murder and mayhem. It isn't too long before the fires are engulfing buildings and spreading fast through the market district. The young mother, quickly noticing the smell of smoke, rouses her husband, grabs her now awakened and crying child, and flees the market district, getting lost in the throng of the other lucky residents who were fortunate enough to be awakened by the fire. Not all will fare as lucky. Meanwhile, 32 miles south of Rome, the Emperor Nero sat in his Antium estate, writing poetry and playing songs on his lyre, dreaming of the day when he could perform yet again for his people. His opportunity was fast approaching. He was just about to retire for the evening when one of his Praetorian Guard came bursting into his chambers. Excusing his impertinence for a moment, Nero asked the man, "Whatever is the matter?" "Rome is burning, my lord. Your people are dying, and the city will soon lie in ruins." Nero did not hesitate. He quickly dressed himself in practical clothes, ordered his horse to be readied, and raced back to Rome, desperate to help his fellow citizens, his loyal subjects. When Nero finally arrived, the fire was in full effect, sweeping through the Circus Maximus, the Palatine Hill, and the Celian Hill. The winds were strong that night, and so helped fan the fires through the most densely packed sections of the city, claiming lives, homes, businesses, and dreams. Those fleeing the fire raced for their lives as the flames licked at their backs, as if a riding crop from an angry horseman were urging them forward. Eventually, the only place left to flee was to the fields and country roads outside the gated city. The people of Rome had to stand by and watch as the eternal city was engulfed in flames. As the emperor arrives, he immediately springs into action, a rare instance for Nero, who was not what one would call a hands-on emperor when it came to the management of his empire. Firefighting efforts, as rudimentary as they were in the ancient world, were begun immediately. The refugees were herded into the private residences of the emperor, turning them into makeshift refugee camps as the city burned around them. The surrounding towns and cities, and even the port of Ostia, were ordered to have provisions brought so that all who needed help could obtain it. As the refugees huddled together, receiving food, water, and other provisions from the imperial guard, rumors began to circulate. Men had been seen setting more fires as the refugees fled. The men had claimed to be acting under the orders of Nero. "No," said another, "it was that strange group of cultists calling themselves Christians. They started the fire as a way to herald the coming of their god." Still others claimed it was the punishment from the Roman gods themselves. Throughout the 6 days and nights that the fire initially burned, the mood was grim and dark in the refugee camps. Finally, having done all he could to order his guards into the city to fight the fire, Emperor Nero returned to one of his estates and began to play his lyre. He sung of the great Greek gods, their triumphant victories, their tragic defeats. He sung of Romulus and Remus, the legendary founders of Rome. He then sung of the fall of Troy. Nero's love for all things Greek culture was no surprise to anyone. Romans were completely Hellenized well before Nero was ever born. But his choice in music was seen as oddly suspicious, and further fed into the rumors that the emperor himself had ordered the men to set the fire. After 6 days and nights had passed, the fire had finally been put out, and people felt they could go back to their lives and try to pick up the pieces. But no sooner had this sense of relief come over the citizens of Rome that the fire flared back up again and burned for another 3 days and nights. Rumors started up again in earnest. The flare-up was caused by the emperor. Nero wanted this to happen. The emperor was a deranged arsonist. Now, the fact that Nero arrived immediately back to the city from Antium to coordinate the response of the fire, the fact that he provided food, water, and shelter to the homeless and newly destitute, and the fact that he tried, in vain, to raise the spirits of the refugees with his music, are all solid points in favor of Nero, the benevolent ruler. According to the ancient sources, once the fire had finished burning, 3 districts of Rome had been completely destroyed. 7 were mostly destroyed, and 4 remained untouched by the flames. Hundreds were dead, and many more thousands were left homeless and destitute. Once the fire was gone, the cleaning and rebuilding project immediately began. Rubble was cleared, masonry companies were hired to rebuild homes using brick rather than wood. Homes were ordered to be rebuilt spaced out from each other. Serious efforts were made to make sure that such a fire could never happen again. But we cannot ignore the facts and circumstances that point toward Nero being the evil monster and inept leader remembered by history. The cleanup and rebuilding efforts brought with them serious costs to the Roman people. The public treasury was empty, The provinces of the empire had huge tax levies placed on them, causing unrest and dissatisfaction with those living in the provinces. Nero devalued the Roman currency, reducing the weight and the silver content of the coins. The biggest offense the emperor had made, though, was not against the economy of the empire, but against her people. Nero had begun making grandiose plans for a new palace, since his old one had just happened to burn down during the Great Fire. This palace was called the Domus Aurea, or Golden Palace. It was a grand structure apparently designed and overseen personally by Nero just shortly after the fire. Construction began later in 64 CE and continued up until his death just 4 years later. The palace was to be decorated in the Greek style, with paintings of satyrs, statues of muses, and depictions of the Greek gods. Nero had also commissioned a 100-foot bronze statue of himself to be placed at the entrance of the Golden Palace for all to see. We don't know exactly how much area the palace grounds were intended to take up, but it is estimated that roughly 1/3 of the city was to become part of the palace grounds, which would include a man-made lake, grazing pastures, groves of trees, bathhouses, a stage, and several other comforts. The Golden Palace, based on what has been excavated today, was never intended as a living quarters for the emperor, but rather as a place of entertainment, excess, and debauchery. It is no wonder that so many people began to favor the rumors that Nero himself had started the fire. He was practically giddy with excitement for his new palace of toys, monuments, and entertainments. Eventually, the rumors of Nero starting the fire reached the ears of the emperor. At first, they enraged him. How could he, the most powerful man in the world, who opened his doors and gave of his coffers to the plebs in their most desperate hour, be accused of such an atrocious crime? Pressure was mounting for him to respond, and the pressure was distracting him from his great monument to his own hubris. Finally, Nero ordered the arrest of some of the Christians that were known to practice their strange cult in the city. He ordered the Christians tortured until they confessed. As Tacitus puts it, he placed upon them the most, quote, exquisite of tortures, unquote, whatever that means. Thus started the first persecution of Christians by the Roman Empire, which lasted intermittently from 64 CE until it was ended by the Edict of Milan in 313 CE. The historical record is so burdened by unreliable sources, tampering by later scholars, and the biases of those who wrote the original sources, that getting a definitive answer for who started the fire of Rome can never truly be answered. However, Nero is high on the suspect list, and it's not improbable that were he tried in today's legal system, the evidence would be pretty damning, if only a touch circumstantial. With the Christians weighted down with the guilt of the fire, their strange beliefs, or at least strange to the ancient Romans, providing the perfect motive, Nero was free to continue working on the rebuilding of the city and the construction of his grand golden palace. But as it is with so many people in history, Nero never lived to see his dream realized. In March of 68 CE, 3 provincial governors, Vindex, Rufus, and Galba, declared a rebellion against the rule of Nero. Part of the blame for this rebellion was placed on the tax policies instituted by Nero to pay for the rebuilding of Rome and his golden palace. Not only had the fire cost him his own palace and roughly 2/3 of the city, but it was likely to cost him his position of power and the luxurious dream of his domus aurea. In June 68 CE, as the fires of rebellion raged around him, and his executioners marched into his estate, Nero ordered his servant Tiberius to stab him and end his life. Muttering to himself, "What an artist dies in me," Nero was stabbed and began bleeding out. His executioners, hearing the commotion inside, rushed into the room and attempted to stop the bleeding. With the blood covering his royal vestments, Nero's final words were reportedly, "Too late. This is loyalty." With Nero died the dynastic line of Emperor Augustus that had started nearly 54 years earlier. For most of the reign of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, the empire had known a peace that was welcome after decades and decades of civil war. But with the death of Nero, Rome's days of instability, chaos, and anarchy were about to begin anew. Nero's legacy is one that has been looked at with disgrace by historians. The Great Fire of Rome is one of those parts of his legacy that is truly a mixed bag. One lesson to take away from the Great Fire and Nero's handling of the event is that people in power are capable of acknowledging a crisis, responding to it well at first, and then using the ensuing chaos to further their own ambitions, greed, and selfishness. So many of history's lessons are still applicable to the common day, if we know where to look. Thank you for listening and giving this show a chance. Season 1 of While Rome Burns will run for 13 episodes, released every 2 weeks. The next episode will release on August 2nd, 2020. If you like what you hear, leave us a review on iTunes so that we can make a second season. While Rome Burns is part of the One Up Podcast Network. Find more content by going to oneuppodcasts.com. Cover art by Igor Nunez. You can contact him for commissions on Twitter at WeCan. That's WHYCCAN. Find more of his art by going to wecan.artstation.com. Background music for this episode provided by Monplaisir under a Creative Commons 0 1.0 Universal Public Domain dedication. Find them on Twitter at Monplaisir Music or at freemusicarchive.org/music/Monplaisir. That's MONPLAISIR. Outro music by Josh Fisher. Thank you so much for listening.